So there's already been a lot of awesome things that I've talked about with Fabula Ultima that makes it stand out from other TTRPGs. But today we're going to jump into one of the foundational, if not the fuel to the entire engine that makes this game unique. In this session of How to Fabula Ultima, we're going to talk about Fabula Points. So as always, before we get started, I think it's necessary and important to say thank you to everyone that has given me their views, subscribed to my channel, and not only given questions and shown intrigue, but shared their stories and experiences of what has been fun with them on Fabula Ultima. I always appreciate your messages directly. I appreciate your comments as well, because it shows that there's people that are really enjoying this game and showing the care that it deserves. I personally think this is one of the best TTRPGs out there, and while it's making great notoriety in certain areas, it definitely could use more. And that is why I am doing these videos for you guys, is because I want this game to expand. There's other big games that are always going to have the marketing behind them, but when you have a game like this that is put with so much heart and soul and in continual fun and engagement with the players that are giving it the attention, I think that is awesome, and I am happy to be a vocal part of that distribution. So once again, if you like my channel, feel free to subscribe if you're new to it. Give reviews, give your comments and criticisms. This is about growth. This is about welcoming a community, and this is about a game that I think really will help change people's point of view on how to be creative, collaborative, and just overall show fun. Now, let's get back to the topic at hand, Fabula Points. So as we jump into the topic, the best thing to ask is, what are Fabula Points? Well, Fabula Points are a meta currency that you have as a player. They're dissociated from the player character in the game, but you can accumulate these over time and have a nice cache of them to be used as expenditures to do great things for your player character or add on or change some narratives in the game. It's a great way to be used as a tool for the player to add to the story, because this is a collaborative narrative game. And instead of just always having these injections and suggestions, the Fabula Points themselves are what help kind of purchase these ideologies to be brought into the game, but also allow great things to happen for your character to have opportunity to succeed. And we can break that down a little bit quicker with the chart to my side here, where we look at the 4 things you can actually do with spending Fabula Points on. You can first alter the story, which is something we'll go into depth at the end of the video because there's a little bit to it. Then there's invoking a bond score to your checks, which we talked about bonds and what they mean. Then there's invoking the trait, which allows rerolls on a check that you perform. And then there are skills, which there are character class skills on greater standard of levels that allow you to spend these meta currency points, Fabula Points, to do awesome things. So now that we have an understanding of what Fabula Points do, it's worth asking, how do we get them? Well, it's actually pretty easy to do in this game because Fabula Ultima is all about the players and the successes of the player characters. And while you can fail, there's a lot of benefits in those failures. And that comes with Fabula Points as well. And Fabula Points can be accumulated through 4 major situations. The first is if you start a game session and you've already got, or if you have 0 Fabula Points, you automatically gain 1. If you roll a fumble, which is a 1 and a 1 on any of your checks, whether it's combat, exploration, whatever the case, you gain a Fabula Point. Then there are villains, which is something we haven't talked about yet, and we will in great detail in another video, but I think it's pretty easy to understand villains are the top hierarchy of the antagonists of the game, and anytime they enter a scene, you get a Fabula Point. And there's times where 3 villains can be in one scene, and boom, you have 3 Fabula Points. Then the 4th is if you are reduced to 0 hit points, you automatically gain 2 Fabula Points. So if you're seeing a pattern here in this game, even when there's a lot of negatives that happen, you're kind of automatically rewarded with Fabula Points to kind of get you back up on your feet. After going over the 4 main situations to obtain Fabula Points, I wanted to underline a few things that also can contribute to gaining Fabula Points. The first is if you start a character from scratch, you automatically get 3 Fabula Points in the start of that character creation to help invoke and kind of get the engine running to use those Fabula Points. Then there is another one, which is one of my favorite tools in this game. It's an optional role, but is to invoke traits and bonds to fail a check. And in turn, if you do that, you gain a Fabula point. Now, why would you do that? In Fabula Ultima, the game is very encouraging to have complex and sometimes turbulent emotions with your characters and the player characters that you associate with your party. And there might be moments you have emotions of hatred or mistrust or inferiority that I think are great in the scenario if there's a situation where those two are together, maybe they're rivals or whatever, and they're trying to kind of do something. I like the idea that someone can say, well, I'm not too keen on working with this character. I'm going to invoke my trait of mistrust to fail the check. And of course, that has a narrative description of what happens, and you gain a Fabula point. I think as long as you guys are playing together with the respect, and it's not seen as PvP or causing problems, and it's a collaborative effort to continue the story, it's a great way to grow the emotions and narrative of the game while also getting a mechanical boost out of it at the same time. Now, also, the final thing I like to do is I like to actually just give a Fabula point to a player that at the beginning of a session does a recap. It rewards them to do a little bit of the narration while I'm getting ready for the game. And I think it's a great way to just get the juices flowing. And on top of that, encourages them to just gain a point that's pretty easily to obtain through most of the consistency of the game. So coming back around from everything we looked at with Fabula Points, I mentioned earlier that you can pretty much have an infinite pool to keep a source cache of, and you can really save up for big moments in big elements of a fight or really tense situations that really depend on success in the game. But the one thing it's worth noting that for each Fabula point you spend, it goes into a session expenditure pool where you take the total amount of Fabula points spent and you basically average it out from the players played. And for every one that it averages out is an EXP point you get in the game. So it encourages you to get these points so you can level quicker too. So there's a fantastic cycle that comes with the acquisition of Fabula points and then the expenditure of Fabula points. And there's almost always no reason to not benefit from using them unless you just get to a point where you're having enough to wait for that big moment. Now, going back to when we were talking about what you can do with Fabula points, on the list I showed, some of them make sense pretty quickly. There's invoking a trait to reroll die. There's invoking a bond to add your bond strength score of whatever you're using to a roll. And then using skills to spend Fabula points with. I haven't presented an example, but there's class abilities that say to do this, you must expend Fabula points. That's pretty easy to understand. But then there's one that is probably the most intricate and important thing to go over. And it's worth noting, this is where being a very collaborative group, being a very respectful group, and then also being a GM that is okay with improv. It is very important, I want to underline, that you are there as a GM to help continue and contribute to the success of these players. And with this Fabula point expenditure, it is called altering the story, which is a great way to create big moments and new things that kind of throw curveballs at the GM. And it's not intentionally used to be against the GM. It is to always allow the players to have some sort of injection to continue the story. But I think it's worth me just going over actual inserts in the book to kind of give an option of understanding, because it can be broad and it can be a lot, but it can also be the best thing ever. So as we reference the core rulebook that goes in depth on the altering the story section of spending a Fabula point, it says as follows. As a player, you can spend one Fabula point to make a statement about the story. You get to shape part of the world, its people, and its creatures to fill in the gray areas and generate opportunity for action, tweak a detail in your favor, or even introduce a convenient plot twist. Now, as we drop below, you look at the bullet points. This is important to see because this is where the complexities and trust are very important. If you want to change or add new details to a character, location, or item that has already been established, such as a character, location, or item the Game Master described or introduced, you will first need the Game Master's permission. If alteration directly affects another player character, for instance, if you're establishing there is a bounty on the head of one of your companions, you will first need permission from the corresponding player. Then, you cannot use this option to contradict a statement previously made by yourself or another participant. Then on the fourth bullet point, it says you cannot use this option to cause mechanical changes, such as gaining or altering a skill, switching a creature's vulnerabilities, or inflicting status effects on one or more enemies. The game master might decide that the element you introduce grants a mechanical advantage, but it's their calls to make, not yours. And then finally, on the bullet point, it says if you introduce a new non-player character this way, that character will still be under the game master's control. Now, under it, it states as with any freeform tool, this option is very powerful and may be used in a variety of ways and intensities. Some players will just add useful items on the scenes, others will come up with entire new locations and place them on the world map. When you sit down to play, discuss what you feel comfortable with, do your best to embrace the adventurous and sometimes over-the-top nature of this rule. So, understanding, once again, as I've stated prior and it will continue to state, this section is all about trust, understanding that changes are about supporting the roles and adding some intrigue and mystique, not used for PvP against other players or anything ridiculous like that. It's worth remembering, Fabula Ultima is a game of heroism and success and overall camaraderie, even if there's rough edges in the emotions of your characters. But we will use one of the examples and another examples for you to understand what altering the story can really contribute to. Under the example 1, it says, after defeating the mirror golem in the depths of the forest ruins, the heroes recover a strange ivory disc bearing mysterious inscriptions. No one among them knows how to read this ancient language, but a player decides to spend 1 Fabula point to state his character knows of an elderly scholar living in the countryside nearby who might be able to help. Since the statement does not contradict anything previously stated by the game master or by another player, it becomes automatically true. The player marks the position and the scholar's tower on your game map. Now, in this scenario, this is very important to understand. It's great to inject Fabula Point altering the story to give you guys as players a opportunity to kind of get around the puzzles that are the gray area, but not just give you the answer.
That'll be $80.
Oh, okay. Sure, thank you kindly. Will that do?
Certainly will. Thank you, Seth.
Hey, thank you.
So once again, I don't think anyone would normally use this to abuse it, but you wouldn't spend a Fabula point to say, oh, well, this happened to be a household of my friend. I know there's a key under the mat to unlock something. You know, like that's technically able to be done, but also kind of a cheap cop-out. Remember, this is a game of adventure, and so when you want to give something like altering the story, the GM has the power to kind of amend it to make it adventurous and not always just a solution, but nonetheless put you in the right direction instead of continually looking for questions to be asked. So we're going to look at these 2 other examples because, once again, I'm not very big at always just showing the core rulebook because I want to encourage you all to read it. This is a book that is very user-friendly and has a lot of great reference to learn the game. But in this moment for the videos, it is very important to underline where you stand on the power of using Fabula Points for altering the story. And I'm going to look at these examples and kind of break down what they mean in translation. So we'll start with example 2. Our heroes are searching for a massive dragon across the rocky hills surrounding Idlefort. They finally track the monster down to a large cavern. At that point, a player declares she wants to spend 1 Fabula point to state that the creature is asleep. This will make it easier to get the drop on them. Now, the dragon is a creature introduced by the game master, which means the player needs permission in order to make a statement about them. The GM is overall okay with this, but points out that it is not magical sleep, and that the group will have to make checks in order to avoid waking the dragon up. So in this example, they're still trying to achieve the same thing. They're trying to locate the dragon, but instead of being hindered you like you would in Dungeons and Dragons with a bunch of questions and the DM having to either request skill rolls, and then if you don't roll well, there is an element of slowing the progression even more, and that can still happen in checks here. But when you have the ability to invoke Fabula points to make it maybe easier to achieve, it is bringing a lot more investment of the players to be involved. And then in this example, let's say they make the check, they're successful, and that leads into maybe just sneaking by them completely, or maybe allowing them to get a big major advantage on them physically in combat. That's all achieved because the player was creative and invoked this Fabula point to allow it to happen. And that's the key of Fabula Ultima. It really gives the players feel like they accomplish more when they interject with the story and see the successes based off of them. Nothing's more rewarded than that, in my opinion. Now, in example 3, it states, 7 years ago, the warrior sorceress Dage deserted the Imperial army. Now, Dage finds herself back at the Imperial capital, leading an infiltration team determined to steal the Soul Crystal from the Empress's clutches. While gathering information in the streets, Dage and her comrade Valancourt realize that they're being followed by a city guard. The player controlling Dage, Hannah, spends 1 Fabula point and reveals that the pursuer is actually a member of her former unit, Ramus. He was never a fan of Imperial cruelties, but remained in the army to feed his family. Since the city guard was character introduced by the game master, Hannah needs permission. And this is a huge change to the scene, but the GM is intrigued and agrees to it. From now on, the game master will still control Ramus, but the heroes have gained a new and useful contact within the capital. However, Ramus still has a weakness. What will he do for his family is threatened? So once again, in this example, it uses a creativity of the player wanting to give some sort of narrative to the character, the NPC that is going on. And this is where I think it's very important if you're running it as a GM, is to trust your players in this game. Trust that they're doing the right things and encourage and reward them if they are coming up with great situations that gives some sort of bite to the scenario and the situation, just as it is in this situation. Ultimately, maybe Ramus will be a betrayer. That's kind of something that gets put into the GM's role. But when it comes to just being given a scenario and the GM thinks everything is going as they planned it, you have to be patient and rewardingly remember that this is you supporting the players being creative. And when they give you a fastball and change the narrative element of that NPC you put in, especially since you haven't really given them any character development yet, it's important to realize this is a moment where you either reward them, or you can straight up tell them, well, I did have an idea of what I want to do with this. If you're okay with it, I'd rather not. But at the same time, I don't really like discrediting people for trying new things if that's going to make the story bigger. So I feel like I've put a lot of effort in trying to explain this scenario, but I think this is one of the biggest moments and the biggest hill to climb in Fabula Ultima, is trusting your group with narrative collaboration that is going to forward the story and make them successful without really just kind of making it a cheat code to just give them the answer or the key to the city to accomplish what they want. So after looking at this, I think it's very important to understand: trust your group, trust your friends, and have fun when you inject Fabula points to alter the story. Now, Fabula points is one of the most exceptional things in the game of Fabula Ultima. And I think it was really worth going into great depth of not only what they do, the accumulation, but as we just finished the tail end of it, the importance of trust, of understanding what you can do when you alter the story, and also entrusting your GM to control what that means. Just because you spent a Fabula point to alter the story doesn't mean you get to control the entire narrative. There are rules, as there's some been discussed in the past part of the video, to understand that it's to continue the story, add on things, but not negate truths, not change realities, not change anything else. It is to add new things. So if you can come into this understanding that major part of it, I think getting together a group that you trust and work together, Fabula Points is one of the most unique and fun things I've ever seen in a TTRPG, and is by far one of the most fun injections in the game. So I hope you understand what this video has brought. If you ever have questions, like I said, always put comments in, send me direct messages. I'm always happy to answer any type of scenario. Also, as always, don't forget to subscribe, and let's continue this journey of learning how to Fabula Ultima.